thought about that, and that is where the problem lies.
Okay, James Tully, let me bring you in here. And you've extensively studied education in India, specifically the mom and pop sort of schools that have emerged. What is your reading of the situation?
Because what's been missing from the discussion so far, Madhav has been talking about the growth of enrollment. In the urban areas, 98% of that growth in enrollment over the last decade has been because of the private schools. I think in the rural areas it's something like 40 or 50%. These low-cost private schools are mushrooming. They're serving the poor, very poor families, and there are many research now, including Madhav's ASER research, my own research and others, is showing that these low-cost private schools are outperforming the government schools. And so they're serving a huge number of families. They're doing better than the government schools at a fraction of the cost. That's another important thing. And so you've got this potential here for a huge revolution to take place. It's estimated, I think, that there is one private school in every 2 Indian villages. That's 3 lakhs private schools in the villages, probably the same or a huge number in the cities. You've got all these entrepreneurs who are willing to do something about education. So I think within a very short time, the problem of quality will be solved nationally.
But Nandan, let's talk about that issue. Entrepreneurs getting into the business of education now. It's increasingly hard. I mean, just for a city like Delhi, you actually need 14 licenses to be able to get a school up and running.
I think that's the challenge. I think certainly primary education is a public good, and the state has to make sure that everybody in the country gets free, high-quality primary education. The question is, should it be delivered through their own mechanism called their public schools, or do they have aided schools like they have in Kerala, where they're private schools funded by the state, or your pure private schools like the ones that James talked about? That's where the big fights are going on today in India.
But Shobnavati, from a corporate India point of view now, we've heard several corporates saying they want to get involved, but they find several challenges and hurdles in the form of the regulatory mechanism that doesn't allow them to do so. What do you think needs to change?
Primary being that I think the corporate sector needs a lot more autonomy. If you are to go in and run a school, you need autonomy in terms of deciding on the fees, in terms of deciding on the syllabus. You have teachers who are there, you have to learn to teach with them. You can't change the teachers.
But it's also the notion of education cannot be something that you can profit from.
No, that is a separate issue altogether. Whether or not you want to make education for profit is different. For instance, in UP, they won't even transfer the building or the land to the private sector. Some states like Punjab are a lot more flexible. And there you've seen, certain corporates have gone in and started the public-private partnership and are doing a far better job.
When you say private participation, I see, various issues that arise.
Okay.
Urban and rural are completely separate. In rural, at least you have land. In urban, in places like Hyderabad, inner city, in Mumbai, in Calcutta, now many parts of Delhi, there is no place. There is, and that's a part of the planning which I keep fighting with Nandan about, that in a renewal mission of the urban India, we should be actually saying preserve the school spaces like you have for playgrounds. So it's a question of town planning. And one thing that is lost and which needs to be looked into is the social division that happens because of the private inclusion. Yes, there could be a private provision, but how do you make sure that it doesn't divide a village down the middle? So the poor go to the government school, which is always seen. You talk about control. When you talk about control, actually, government actually is willing to give up control, but politically people don't have the mindset of saying hand it over.
I think the question is, how do you have private schools and equity at the same time? Because otherwise, only the slightly more well-off children will go to the private school, and the poorest who have no access will go to the public schools, and nobody will bother about them. And I think that's the basic issue.
It also happens along genders. Brother goes to private. We've seen
that's
now
right. And
60% kids in private schools are boys, and 40% are girls.
Or one child is given that education.
In fact, my friend has even said that this is what is preventing, actually this is hindering the improvement of the government schools, because the better off and the more influential people are sending their children to private schools, and therefore they're not putting the pressures on the authorities to actually upscale the teaching.
I mean, I'm not sure that's a reason. I mean, if the poor are abandoning government schools because in them their children feel abandoned, that there are ways of getting this equity issue. First of all, the schools themselves, our large-scale surveys in Delhi, in Hyderabad and rural Andhra Pradesh, found the schools themselves were giving free places, scholarships, to the poorest of the poor. Typically, we found about 7% of schools 7% of places were given to free. In the urban areas, there's not that gender difference. I know you find it in the rural areas. In the urban areas, I work in Muslim Hyderabad, old city Hyderabad. There are equal numbers of girls and boys in the schools. In fact, more girls at the higher levels than boys. So that picture is changing. I would take issue with your idea, Nandan, that you need it to be free, though, to everyone. I think there's got to be a free provided as a possibility.
I think any society, we have to think of primary education as a public good. And if it's a public good, then every child must have the access to a school, which is without paying fees.
There must be access, but if parents prefer to pay fees, small fees, 100 rupees, 200 rupees a month, we're talking about.
I agree with you. I think we should give the choices.
Yeah, if they prefer that, because then the school is accountable.
But we cannot have the state copping out. The state has the obligation to make sure there's 100% literacy in the country.
When we say free and compulsory education, it is interpreted as compulsorily free education. What you have to turn it around and say, and this was done in Madhya Pradesh. There was a hospital, the Rogi Kalyan Samiti program, which won a World Bank award, Global Development Network award, where the hospital was opened up post the Surat plague scare, saying that if you want to pay, you can pay. You are allowed to pay. And actually the system prospered. And then when the government changed it disbanded it. But actually that's a great idea, because the panchayat, first of all, is authorized to collect taxes. So they should be able to collect local taxes or ask people, if you want to pay, come in and pay 5 rupees at any time. There's no compulsion. But this whole idea that you will not pay is running away from accountability. I think that is a very important distinction that we are making.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought. We're going to take a quick commercial break and come back with the solutions to save our classrooms. You're watching Imagining India with Nandan Nilkani. Welcome back. You're watching Imagining India with Nandan Nilkani, and we're discussing the solutions to save our classrooms. Nandan, you talk about some of the solutions in your book, school vouchers, which have been experimented with in the US, Chile, Ireland, etc., and they have been pretty successful. You think it'll work in India?
No, I think it'll work. I think we may not want to call them vouchers, because vouchers is a politically explosive word, but scholarships is a good word to use. See, I think the thing is, we have this extraordinary demand. We know that the poor want to get educated. We have this huge supply of capital coming down from the state. So we have both the demand and supply at a gross level in place. It's the fine-tuning of that, and we have to figure out, without being ideological, what is the best delivery mechanism, what is the best combination of public and private role in that, to make sure all our children get educated.
But I think there's a bigger problem, and that is the regulatory hurdles. We spoke about those earlier, but they apply very much to these low-cost private schools as well. Let's try and free up the regulations so that this grassroots initiative can flourish. It's serving the poor already. It's already, if you like, it's found a silver bullet.
That's the hypocrisy we have. You know, in all these schools, the poor children are deserting the government schools and